Hello, everybody, and welcome to what has become a little bit of a tradition around these parts at the end of a season. We are here today to talk about everything that happened in the regular season, but also to give you a little bit of a playoff preview before the action gets underway on this broadcast. Of course, I am joined alongside Mr. B Major this time out. And Brandon, what a season this was. So excited that you're here with me to talk about this.
And so happy to be here. I love the ECL. You love the ECL. We all love the ECL here at Sports Gamer GG. And always so exciting to be a part of this coverage, especially when you get towards that playoff time where the games mean more. It's that time of the season where what happened in the last 6 weeks, none of it matters anymore. It is a new season, and all of these 8 teams are fighting for that championship and for a spot in the grand final. It's going to be so fun to see who's going to pull it out and see some of the teams that managed to get their way to that spot.
16 teams started this elite season. Of course, our spring campaign here. A look at the standings as they happen to wrap up after that 30-game campaign, of course, for them. And these were the final standings, easy for me to say at this stage. Of course, the top 8 teams making the postseason. Of course, some of those teams on that right-hand side, safe from relegation, 9 through 11. They're in, and 12 even. They're in those safety spots. And then it gets interesting, and we'll talk about the situations for every single team, not just the playoff teams today. But of course, Brandon, 13, 14, and 15 finishing in those relegation battle spots, whereas IQ finishing in last. They have been relegated to our pro division.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting because a lot of these teams are about the teams we kind of expected to be in this area other than IQ, but we're going to have to see them face against 3 rather of the top teams in the pro division. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be able to claw their way and stick their way up in this elite division, or who is going to be down in the pro division next time we see these teams next season. Obviously, none of these squads want to find themselves down in that second tier, but boy, the pro division is really deep. There's a lot of competition down there. It's going to be a lot of interesting matchups to see who they face out of those 3 teams.
So, a reminder of what the bracket looks like. Of course, playoff action begins right here today on this very broadcast, but these are the 4 first round matchups that we will have here for you. Of course, our number 1 seed and 2-time defending champions, H-Reds, take on Conquer Gaming. H-Reds very much looking to secure that grand final prize without having to compete against another team for it. They won our winter season. If they win our spring season as well, they are crowned grand champions for ECL 22. But every single other team here certainly has the desire to, to upstage them. In our second matchup, the 2 seed for Lunda taking on 7th seed Roots Gaming. Number 3 and 6 at Sabo Esports against Habu. And our final opening round matchup, Urabura Hockey against Goons. And again, we will talk about all 4 of those matchups a little bit later on in this presentation. But before that, like I mentioned, we want to be able to talk about the teams that did not make it, because as much as we're looking forward to the playoffs getting started today, there's a story to be told with every team. And we're going to start off with a little bit of a season recap for the 2 teams that finished in those bottom 2 spots. Of course, we talked about it with IQ finishing in 16th and getting relegated. And Brandon, what a fall from grace from them. They finished 5th last season, making the playoffs, and the same squad. It was kind of something that we thought heading into this season. The same squad. We saw a lot of turnover from other teams. Maybe the chemistry would kind of carry over. We know that good teams miss the playoffs. It's not often that a team of their caliber will find themselves all the way down, the standings. And unfortunately, not only were they one of those good teams to miss the playoffs, it was far worse than any of us could have expected. They have been relegated. Club captain Niepi has made it clear on social media that the club weren't really enjoying the gameplay at this stage, which made it tough to find motivation, which I think is more than understandable. And for now, the club's future is very much in limbo, arguably the most shocking story of the season.
Yeah, I think that the only drop that we've seen this surprising, and I kind of asked you this off the air a few days ago, Yip Yavaska a few seasons ago when they dropped down to the pro division. This is an IQ team that you have to remember, they have been a mainstay in the playoffs the last few seasons. They've always been one of the top teams in this division, and many people expected them to not just be one of those playoff teams, but maybe a team that found a way to break through and make their way into the semifinals. They returned all 6 starters. They were a really solid team defensively last season, but this season, things just never seem to consistently click for this group. And as you mentioned, Niepi in that social media post kind of saying that they didn't really have the motivation to practice and play the game. And that costed them as other teams kind of showed up and improved. Teams like Conquer and Ortobro that were not great last season jumped IQ, found their way into the playoffs. And unfortunately for this team, just not able to find their form. So we'll see what the future holds for them. Things very much up in the air. Like you said, it's going to be a very long and interesting few months for this team to see what happens.
The offense fell off. The defense ended up being worse than expected. The goaltending fell off as well. Just a very rough season for IQ. On the other side of it, though, that 15th place team in Stargazing, you just saw their lineup. Now, this was interesting. They were promoted from our pro division after spending time there in the winter season. They knocked out Northern Ascendancy, a now defunct club, in a relegation playoff matchup. And they stepped into this season, Brandon, with 5 rookies, the only member of that starting 6 with former elite experience was Pirza. But despite that, and despite the fact that they had a lot of, going against them, it's not often you'll see an all-rookie lineup succeed and stay in the division, but they do still have a chance to do that. The jury's out on how this season will be viewed until we know if they've secured their spot, but they had some decent offense, and I mean, especially, too, you want to talk about a Rookie of the Year candidate in Koloslav, finishing with 47 points on the season. Maybe the biggest reason as to why they're still in this division, at least as we speak.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that because something that I think kind of gets lost in the shuffle with teams that do make the jump to the elite division is that it takes time to adjust to playing teams at this level on a consistent basis. It's one thing to be one of the top teams in the pro division or the core division, and you see it in those tiers as well. But when you're making that jump with a team that has so many new talents to this division that haven't played at this level before, it takes some time to adjust. It takes some time to figure out how to win games against some of the top teams in Europe. And Stargazing had to go through some of those growing pains this season, but they avoided that automatic relegation. They found themselves in 15th, and now they get a chance to earn their way back into this elite division next year. And if they can do it, they might be a team that sees themselves ascend a little bit. Now they do have a little bit more of that experience in the ECL's top flight.
The other 2 teams, of course, that we mentioned that do find themselves in the relegation battle positions, HV71 and the Fallon Coal Miners. For HV, it is a second consecutive 14th place finish. Of course, they did have some changes to their lineups this season, losing Putaking and Zupe on defense, but they bring in Kauto and Antonio Mannon, who led this team in points. Kauto, a promising rookie, but all eyes were on Antonio heading in to this season. The goal was to secure their spot in Elite. They might still do so, but no doubt, Antonio Mannon, the key player for HV71, who knows where they'd be without him. And not to mention Kofalainen as well. 82% save percentage this year, up from a 76 last season. So big improvement there. There was a lack of scoring depth, though, and that might still be a cause for their potential relegation.
Yeah, and it's kind of unfortunate for HV71 because, like you said, they've kind of found themselves stuck in this spot of 14th where they just have not been able to get past that relegation series zone. And it's kind of just a matter of how the league unfolded this season. If they had the 27 points last season that they did this season, they wouldn't have been in the relegation zone. They actually would have finished 10th in the standings last season with the record that they had in the spring campaign. So it's kind of unfortunate to see HV71 in this spot, but yet again, they're going to have to earn their way through in those relegation series. And they're a team that maybe can ascend a little bit more next season. We saw them improve a little bit this season with the changes they made, but definitely not the result they were looking for. They were hoping to at least maybe push a little bit closer to that A spot to get into the playoffs.
And the other team, of course, the Fallon Coal Miners taking over the spot that was once, I believe, Granite Gaming's once upon a time. Of course, this team back together for the first time since ECL 7. We knew the league had changed a lot since then. And we looked at this team as a group of veterans, a lot of experience, a lot of talent. Would the chemistry come together? And flat out, the front 3 were very, very impressive in terms of their point total. Satapoika 37, Martindale 44, up from the 28-point total he had as captain of Northern Ascendancy from last season. And then Fopa Toflin goes from 38 points to 52. The front three were great, but the team defense and goaltending, I would say, simply wasn't up to snuff. There's really no way to sugarcoat that. This division was as competitive as it's ever been. And someone, you look at these guys, on paper, and really any team, somebody was going to finish in 13th who on paper were better than a 13th place finish. Unfortunately for Fallon, it was them who end up here. I do think it would be one of the more shocking moments, though, in the history of at least my time covering the ECL, if the coal miners were not to stay in the elite division, just for the experience that they have here. And there are a lot of guys who do have some history in terms of competing in these relegation spots, the likes of Martindale and Tonsky, both as former captains of clubs in the elite division, have been in this spot. So I personally would expect to see them stay, but you never know in a division that's all this competitive, Brandon.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about this season, but the ECL, you expect the unexpected, right? One of these pro teams that they'll face have that motivation to try to get to the ECL's top level. Fallon Coal Miners, they're going to have to look out for that, but it's kind of unfortunate for them because, like you said, they had moments where it seemed like they could maybe be a playoff team. They were kind of the mystery team coming into the season, taking Granite Gaming's place. They started out the season actually in that playoff contention, but unfortunately fell off a little bit. Like you mentioned, that defense kind of fell off a little bit. Actually, the highest amount of goals allowed out of any team in the Elite Division this season. So if they can kind of fix that and adjust that going into the offseason, especially in the relegation series, this team could maybe be one that pushes for a playoff spot next season if they are to stay in the Elite Division. But nevertheless, a few positives, a few negatives in their first season back. Going to be interesting to see how they look in that upcoming series and potentially next season as well.
I mentioned HV71 finishing in 14th for the second year in a row. YMCA Esports finished in 12th for the second season in a row. And Yippee Voskala finished in 11th for YMCA, another team with no lineup changes, as interesting as that was. And it was viewed as a disappointing result, I would say, for them to finish in 12th last season. And it's funny because in the preseason preview, I mentioned, they need to step up their offensive point totals. Every single skater who played in that prior season improved on their point totals, and that extra bit of offense, it was enough to push them into safety. But again, not enough to get them back into a playoff picture. So I'm sure there's a little bit of frustration there. And for Yippee Voskala, back in the Elite Division, winning the Pro Division playoffs in 6 games over Reality Check in our winter season, they bring in Pawanso, or they lose Pawanso, but bring in Aro to replace him as the only rookie in this lineup. Everybody else with prior Elite experience. And for them, again, I think playoffs weren't out of the question. But at the end of the day, they're safe. It wasn't pretty. A lack of offense and unfortunately team defense. I mean, Kazu, a 77% save percentage would certainly indicate the team defense wasn't up to snuff. This was, I think, the bare minimum that they had their sights set on. Safety will suffice, but again, it's another team where, and I think for both of these teams in particular, I think they're better than what they showed this season.
Yeah, they were kind of two teams that were on the bubble watch, so to speak, going in. YMCA, they've been in the playoffs before, haven't necessarily had deep playoff success, but they've been there, and that counts for something. They're looking to find a way to get back to that level after a few seasons of a little bit of off play in terms of what their expectations would be, and unfortunately just falling a little bit short yet again this season. And they kind of have found themselves stuck in this mid-table kind of spot that they haven't been able to dig themselves out of. So we'll see if they can just continue improving, or if maybe a few transfers are on the way to kind of bolster some of that scoring that you talked about. While for Yevascola, they were a team that I think many kind of had penciled in to maybe be at around that 7th or 8th seed. They brought in a lot of the same pieces that won that pro championship last season, a lot of ECL elite experience as well. Unfortunately for them, 3-7-0 in their last 10. Just a story of not being hot at the right time. They dropped a lot of points in the last 10 games of the season. A few teams such as ZSD, Conquer, Roots, etc. jumped them due to that, and it found Yevasco sliding all the way to this 11th spot in no man's land.
We cover now the final two teams that missed out on the postseason. And of course, I think again, we've talked already flat out about surprising teams that weren't able to make it into the top eight. This next pairing has perhaps the most surprising name that did not make the playoffs. As in 10th, we have ZSC Esports, and in 9th, the last spot, the first team out, Färjestad, FBK, failing to make the postseason. We'll talk about ZSC first, though. Of course, the lineup this year really highlighted by the addition of Kermit on that left-hand side, brought in from No Rex Gaming, and was tied for the team lead in points with 41. On one hand, a good accomplishment for them to again secure safety, but on the other, no doubt it's frustrating to not be able to take that step forward. Again, Kermit was a fantastic pickup. And another guy where, kind of like we talked about with HV71 and Antonio Mannon, where would this club be without a player like that and without a pickup like that? Certainly in the conversation for transfer of the season. Overall, though, this team fell short in just about every aspect. The offense just wasn't quite good enough. The defense and goaltending, just not quite good enough. And then there's Färjestad, which from 4th place and have been a perennial playoff team for the past couple of seasons. They were a Final Four team last year. They undergo some changes. Fopa Toflin, Mr. Nipsely out in favor of Ekin and Laminens. And after those two big losses, you think, okay, how are these pickups going to work? And on paper, they were phenomenal pickups. The expectations were maybe higher than they've ever been for this team. But it's a failure of a season for how talented this club is. And I don't try to throw specific players under the bus, but Afe and Ekin, who both went from posting 50-plus point seasons each to both being under 40 points this year. Very intrigued to see what's next for FBK and both of these teams, Brandon.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, and especially for ZSC because they find themselves in an interesting situation. You kind of see in the real life NHL, there's some teams that are kind of stuck in that middle pack. We kind of said that with YMCA a little bit earlier as well. Well, ZSC, they are kind of one of those teams. They're right at that cusp to where they can be a playoff team. They've improved this roster. They've improved as a group the last couple of seasons, but they just haven't been able to break that ceiling to get into that top 8. And we've seen a few teams that have seen success this season running it back with a similar core, not shaking too many things up, but just finding things within their own game to improve and find more points in the standings because of that. So I think that's going to be a team that we could maybe look out for to maybe make a big move in the transfer window during the offseason, or maybe we'll see them run it back and keep that chemistry. While for Färjestad, they made a lot of the big moves. They brought in Ekin, they brought in Lemonins, guys that are staples on that right side and have played together for years with Granite Gaming and now with Färjestad. But for them to have missed the playoffs, considering they have been one of those top 4 teams for so long, have so much star power across the board, absolutely shocking that this team found themselves in 9th. I don't think anyone would disagree to say that they were one of the bigger surprises and probably one of the bigger disappointments this season. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this team because that is well below expectation for them. Usually a team that is contending for championships, let alone missing out on the big dance altogether.
So with that, let's move into talking about the playoff teams. We won't be talking about the matchups yet. We'll stay in order of the standings. So that brings us to perhaps 2 surprising names based off of expectations this season. Finishing in 8th, Conquer Gaming, and in 7th, it was Roots Gaming. For Conquer, finishing 15th last season, fighting for survival once again. Last season they finished just 2 wins back of 12th. It's maybe not often fair to say, oh, just 2 wins with how tough this league is, but nobody was expecting this. This is the story of the season, in my opinion. A team that so many expected to be right back in that relegation conversation, and they make it over some teams who were viewed as nearly, if not outright locks, to make the final 8. An absolutely incredible accomplishment. Yes, they have a tough task ahead of them, as we'll talk about, but for now, they get to celebrate a tremendous season. What a pickup the likes of Kadanarski was as well on that left defensive side. Arginu stepping back into the lineup as well. He'll be in the conversation for comeback player of the year. For Roots, finished 9th last season, just missing out. And another team No changes to the lineups, the same goal of making the playoffs, and they did just that. They had great offensive output across the board, solid goaltending, and all in all, a solid recipe for success to get them into a playoff situation. A really strong season for both of these teams, despite what expectations might have been.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. And both of these teams were teams that sort of defied expectations, especially Conquer Gaming, because if you go back to the season preview before we got this whole thing started, they were projected to finish 15th again. So not only were they not pegged to be a playoff team, they were pegged to be a team that could very well be fighting against automatic relegation in that 16th spot. Well, cue the Michael Jordan and I took that personally meme and put the Conquer Gaming logo right on top of it. This team proved a ton of people wrong, and I have to agree with you. Definitely one of the stories of the season, and they just found ways to pick up points. And for Roots Gaming, the same thing, just finding ways to pick up points. They ran it back with the same starting lineup from last season, and it's why I said a team like ZSE Esports probably could do the same next season, because if you can just find ways to improve your game when you are a team that just finished outside the playoffs, you know you can compete, you know you can get there. It's just a matter of filling in some of those holes and honing the game a little bit to make yourself a playoff team. Roots Gaming have done that. They earned their way in, and now they find themselves with their first ever ECL Elite playoff berth.
There you go. Again, a phenomenal set of stories there. I told you, this is why we do our little season recap. Always so much to talk about between every single team that we have. But we'll move on to talking about our next two playoff teams. Again, not a playoff matchup, but it is Habu Gaming finishing in 6th and Goons, who finished in that 5 spot. For Habu, another season finishing in 6th, but obviously the big story. Flyer Kungan out to Frölunda. They bring in Pawanso from Yipivaskal, of course, formerly of this team as well. And all things considered, it's a solid accomplishment given the, frankly, seismic change to the makeup of this team. You know, you talk about Billy Kuhn stepping up from defense to forward. Sibelius went from being in a goaltending tandem with Hanselinho to being on the defensive side. They didn't have an elite point getter. Hansu didn't have a career year in terms of statistics, but the experience of these 6, it was enough to carry them through. But what happens next? I am very, very intrigued. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then, of course, for Goons, last year they finished in 8th. They lost in round 1 to H-Reds. This year, though, that 5th place spot, the only transfer in was Supreeks, who ended up being their primary goalie in a tandem with Fincona. And there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding this lineup to start the season. You know, we kind of talked about it a lot. The aura of them being a potential title challenger once they made it to the Elite Division has started to fade a bit. And this was a really interesting year. You know, Piku Roger and Lightning practically changed stat lines from season to season. In terms of Piku Roger last year was over 50 points. Lightning was just over 40. And this year you had the inverse, which was very surprising to see. Keskatalo went from a depth spot to posting 39 points, while Kroketzi dropped back to defense and still did very well. 27 points on the year for him. But then there's the defense and the goaltending, Brandon. A team of this caliber seeing both goalies with sub 80% save percentages, that's a defensive issue. And we'll see if they have it figured out come playoff time.
Yeah, and that's going to be huge, frankly, for this team if they want to try to make that run that they're hoping to make. This is a Goons team that has had that expectation or that wonder of when are they going to break through. They've been in those playoff positions. They've proven they can make it, but they haven't proven that they can be within that top 4 yet, especially in the playoffs. So ideally, you would kind of hope to see your goaltenders over that 80% mark, but you have to remember that mark isn't just down to making saves and letting goals in. A lot of it comes down to the opportunities that are being let up in front of you. Goons are a team that kind of saw themselves take a little bit of a step back this season defensively. They allowed 68 goals. Their goal differential was only a +4 this season. That is a bit of a drop from what we've seen from this team in the past, especially being a team that is one of the more aggressive, in-your-face teams defensively that we have here in the Elite Division. So Goons are going to have to step up, especially playing an Orebro team in the playoffs that have really stepped up on their own right. But you look at the other team next to them in Havu, they also have kind of lost the perception maybe in the public eye as a powerhouse, I guess you could say, as we've seen them as in past season, losing in Fire Kungen, losing in the first round last season to Frölunda. They started out the season outside the playoffs. They had a rather rough record in the first 15 games of the season, and we were wondering if they would even find themselves in this position. But they got hot at the right time, picked it up, filled in the holes, found their way without their longtime captain and centerman, and ended up finding a way to get themselves into playoffs and even in as a sixth seed. So these are two teams that have a ton to prove in this playoff round. It's going to be a lot of fun to see if they can maybe meet or surpass those expectations, because for both these teams, they're rather high.
Absolutely. We get to the top four now in terms of the standings. In fourth, Pro Hockey and Sawo Esports finishing in third. Let's talk about Urobro for first there, because again, an unbelievable season for them. I feel like I'm running out of descriptors for a lot of these teams. Urobro went from 11th to 4th this year. Incredible run for them. You know, they were still potentially stuck in that rut of the outside looking in, we thought, heading in to the season, but we did kind of deem them as the who knows type of team. I think a lot of pro players within this division especially were looking at them as a team where it's like, okay, they haven't really captured their potential. And would you look at that in terms of who knows what they're going to do? It was a playoff push. What a season. Pikari was the perfect addition to help this offense explode. Every single person in this lineup improved on their point totals. And Ellie Kamel, much closer to showing that true potential, goes from a 76% save percentage up to an 81. A complete performance, but now they have to prove that they can get it done in the playoffs. But still, phenomenal work from these six. So bravo for that performance. And then we talk about Sawo. Finished in second last season, but lost in round one in the playoffs. They finished third here now. They do make the change. Wenger leaving the team, replaced by Teemu, and which made it very clear heading into this year. The goal was simple: prove that last year's regular season wasn't a fluke. And it's tough to find fault with this lineup. Technically, there was a drop in net points from the front three, but new addition in Teemu is going to give every other defender in this league a run for their money when it comes to winning that Defender of the Season award. 36 points on the blue line for Teemu. Absolutely fantastic. And Nike's numbers in goal dropped. You might remember an 898 save percentage last season, which is unbelievable. Still finished with an 833, and that was the second highest save percentage among starters in the league. So they do still have a lot to prove after last season's first round exit. I doubt a slightly lower seed was in the plans, but this is still a fantastic team.
Absolutely. And this is a team that, at least to me, if you were to pick a team outside of H-Reds and Frölunda that were most likely to earn their way into the finals, I think Sago is that team. You have to remember last season, they were that number two team. They were phenomenal defensively in Unique with one of the better goaltending seasons I think we've seen here in the ECL Elite Division. They were also a team that didn't have playoff experience. If I'm correct, that was their first taste of playoff experience in the ECL Elite Division last season. And they faced a really hot Granite Gaming team that had a lot of talent, was a bit better than their 7th seed gave them credit for, and beat them in 6 games. Now Sago have that experience. They know what it tastes like. They know what it takes to win in those situations. And then, like you mentioned, maybe the most underrated potentially signing during the transfer period in Teemu. I think that it kind of went under the radar due to the Flyer Kungen move, due to some of the moves you saw teams like Fedestad made. Teemu adds another element to this team offensively. His ability to break the puck out and find the open man to get that push into the offensive zone. So important for a team like Sawo, especially when you are trying to compete now with the H-Reds and the Frölundas of the ECL Elite Division. So if I had to pick a team that could maybe ascend into the finals outside those top two, it would be Sawo. And if you want to look at the other side, a sleeper team, potentially Orobro. Who expected them to be here? They were projected to be 14th in the season preview. When I know you kind of said that Conquer Gaming was maybe the best story this season, but I have to be honest, Tugi, I think I'm going with this Orobro team. They did not have any expectation to be here, and they completely turned it around from top to bottom, especially defensively. They allowed the most goals in the league last season. This season, completely lower. Actually, it was the second most goals in the league last season. They went from 90 to 60 A third less goals allowed for this team. They improved astronomically in their own zone. They also completely turned around their penalty kill as well. This team is the real deal. And to be honest with you, if you're looking for a potential sleeper pick, this Orebro team could very well be it.
A lot of tremendous stories, as we have said. This is why we cover everything. And it brings us to our final two teams based off of regular season standings. And who'd have thought it would be these two? The second seed heading into the playoffs, of course, is Frölunda. And the number one seed, again, our two-time defending champions in H-Reds. Let's take a look here at Frölunda. Last season, again, they finished third. They went on to lose to H-Reds in the finals. Heading into the season, well, there was no bigger way to state your intentions than by signing the captain from your greatest rivals in Habu. They bring in Flyer Kungen with Teemu departing. The biggest transfer in the history of the ECL has paid off, at least so far. Flyer Kungen's presence on that right-hand side allowed Playmaker to really return to form. He went from 53 points last year up to a very nice 69 for this year, and it allowed Eki to move into the middle. And what a difference maker he is in that role. No one perhaps has better net front presence than Eki does in this entire division, maybe even in the world of competitive Sixes esports here. And then Potzloff, the former center, drops back the defense, takes to it like a fish to water. Loimu was solid as ever. Kape's numbers returning back to where you'd expect it to be. But I'll throw it to you here to talk about them before I mention anything about H-Reds, Brandon. The problem was it still wasn't enough to claim that top seed. But at the end of the day, the top seed in the regular season, that's not the goal. The championship is the goal.
Yeah, and I think if you were to ask any of the men on your screen whether they'd be the first seed or the champions at the end of the season, I think that without any hesitation, they would take the latter. This is a Frölunda team that we saw make those changes, adding in Flyer Kungen, and we kind of got a sneak peek of Eki at the center position at the end of the finals last season. In the last two games, after they went down 3-0 in that series, we saw Patslav move over to the right wing, Eki move over to center. They looked really good, actually maybe outplayed H-Reds in both games 4 and 5 in that final, just were not able to have enough after going down 3-0 so early. But this lineup has had a lot of change underratedly this season, but it's worked out for them. Now the question is, can they translate that into the playoffs, and can this be the formula to beat this H-Reds team that is kind of been the kryptonite for them the last couple of seasons? They denied Frölunda of the back-to-back championships for the first time when they were Philadelphia, and then they had to see H-Reds do that same thing against them. And I know you'll talk more about them in a little bit, but I think that's kind of the question. Is this the lineup to get them over the top and take down that rival on the other side?
You mentioned the rival on the other side here for H-Reds again. I've mentioned their championship pedigree now at this season. Mentioned at the start of the year, first team to repeat might be the first team to three-peat. They are very much on pace to do just that. Despite the fact Villapoika dropped from 70 points to only 48, this team still comfortably finished in first place. That's hilarious to me. In general, their scoring was down for everyone, granted. 29 games played also a factor. There was the one forfeit involved, the one walkover. Yet still, here they are. And I swear it feels like they decided to just be that much more defensive to challenge themselves. FaZe led the league with an unreal 87% save percentage, likely securing him goalie of the season. What a team who very much find themselves almost to what we're seeing in the NHL right now with the Tampa Bay Lightning. They are the favorites until someone shows us why they shouldn't be, and I don't know if that's going to happen.
Sugi, I kid you not, it's like you read my notes. That's exactly what I was going to say. They are in a very similar position to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and you kind of talk about that in the same essence. They have a chance to do something that no one else has come close to doing. Dynasty talk, GOAT talk, potentially, in terms of being one of the best teams to ever step foot on the virtual ice. Maybe not just in Europe, but in the world potentially. We've yet to see a team have discontinued of dominance before in this division, and doing it the way that they have done it the last few seasons. I mean, they could be the 80s Oilers, the 90s Bulls, I know you'll like this one, the 2000s Patriots from Brady and Belichick here of the ECL. So they have a chance to do something very, very special this season. And we heard Benito say it last season. They hate losing more than they love winning. Well, they haven't done a lot of losing lately. I expect nothing different here in this playoff run from them.
was tempted to break out the old Mac Jones jersey, but we'll save that for this fall. With that, everybody, we've taken a look at the teams for their first 30 games of the season and the results of that. But now we shift our focus to the playoffs. And the first matchup we have to talk about, again, the battle of 1 versus 8, as H-Reds will be taking on Conquer Gaming in this opening round contest. We'll get you a look here at the team stats as well as they happen to be in the regular season. And Brandon, I'll get your thoughts on this in a moment. But for me, here's my kind of take on this. The champions know what's expected of them, even if in any given game, any given Sunday, as the old saying goes, either side can win. I view this as Conquer playing with house money. There's no pressure on them, and that's where their chance to make things interesting comes from. But I said what I said. H-Reds are still the favorites until proven otherwise, as these numbers showcase us.
Yeah, and I like that you said that, because with Conquer Gaming, they go into the series with a similar situation that they went into the season, right? No one expected them to be a playoff team. No one expected them to compete with some of these higher level teams. Like we mentioned, they were projected to finish 15th in the season preview. All they've done is prove us all wrong, exceed expectations, shock and cause the unexpected all season long. Well, what's more unexpected than knocking out H-Reds, the back-to-back champions, in the first round? This team, like you said, is playing with house money. And if you want a little bit more intrigue, how about this? Conquer Gaming won the season series. Both games they won 2-1 and 1-0 in overtime. So out of the 4 total losses H-Reds took, the team they're playing in round 1 handed them half of them. I'm not saying Conquer's going to win the series. I'm not even saying that the predictions would be wrong to say H-Reds would make quick work. All I'm saying is do not be surprised if Conquer maybe shock the world and push this series a little bit deeper than we may expect.
As we said, any given Sunday, it really comes to mind here. You never know what's going to happen. Again, H-Reds, though, certainly the favorites, and for good reason. With that, we'll move ahead to talking about the second of these opening 4 matchups here. And again, the opening round of our playoffs. The number 2 seed for Lunda HC getting ready to take on number 7 in Roots Gaming. Now, again, we talked about it for Lunda, the expectations for them this season, how strong of a team that they were. And of course, we do have the stats for this particular matchup as well. But it really is that similar story for Lunda being the massive favorites. In the past, though, they have been susceptible to a bit of trouble in the opening round, famously Northern Ascendancy giving them a little bit of a hassle a few years ago. So Roots could make things interesting. After all, the 2 seed did fall in round 1 this past winter. Sorry to the Sawwell boys for bringing that up again.
Yeah, and if you go back and look at the 2 games that these 2 teams played, Roots competed pretty well with Fallon. They split the 2 games between one another. Fallon won a game 4-2. Roots won a game 2-1, and the stats pretty close to one another. The shots were only 19-18 in favor of Fallon. And in the game that Roots won, they held that Fallon side to just 5 shots in the entirety of that game. So this is a team that can compete with this Fallon team. They know they can. I would expect Fallon to go in and take care of business. They've been so good. They have such a chip on their shoulder, and they're professionals with this. They have always carried themselves with that sense of professionalism throughout their time here in the ECL. But Roots are a really good side, and I kind of think they're in the same situation as Conquer Gaming. Not many expect them to win. They're playing with house money. I could not be surprised if they maybe found a way to take this to 6, maybe even 7.
Absolutely. So again, 2 matchups there for the playoff preview, very much in the books. We have our third matchup here, though, and these latter 2 certainly where it gets a little bit more interesting. This first one, the battle of 3 and 6, Sawwell Esports taking on Habu Gaming. And again, so excited for this particular matchup because this is perhaps maybe the most important series of the opening round. And that statement might turn some heads, but think about what's on the line here for these teams, as again, the numbers will come up here on screen in a moment. Sawwell, they should be desperate to get out of this first round. Everyone knows they're legit, but you have to succeed when the lights are on the brightest, as cliche as that is. And you have to do that to be viewed among the top teams in this league. For Havu, if they win, It's a massive story of perseverance, of a veteran group, playing, figuring it out to prove that they still got it. But if they lose, who knows what happens? And what is their future? As a club, as individuals, I'm not here to stir up drama or really to create speculation. I just feel like it's a fair question. They might already know what happens regardless of the result of this series, whether or not they're back for ECL 23. But if I've learned anything in my time here covering the ECL, great players like this don't like to feel like their ceiling is anything less than a championship. And if Habu were to fall in this round, where do they view their ceiling as a club? This is why I view it as the most intriguing matchup here, because these are two teams who are desperate to prove they're in that top tier.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that because the storyline built in with the series, there's so much on the line, not just for a series this season, but like you said, for the future of these two teams. You look at it from Havu's perspective, they were one of the first powerhouses in European sixes, constantly competing for championships. I mean, how many times did we see those finals battles between them and now Fallon, where it seemed like they were winning championships every other season, swapping the trophy with one another. And it feels like ever since then, it's just been a slow, steady decline every season, from not making it to the finals and losing in the semis in ECL 12 to getting first rounded in a sweep last season to now this season they lost Flyer Kungen and started out the season rather not well, to be quite honest. A pretty poor start almost hindered their chances to even get it at all, but they clawed their way in. And if they lose this series, then the chatter begins on the outside of, is this potentially the fall of Havu? So you obviously want to avoid that. While for Sawo, they have a lot to prove. They've proved to be a great regular season team, but none of that matters if you can't do it in the playoffs. This is a huge season for them to prove that they can truly compete with those top tier teams when it matters and be that championship contender. Last season was the disappointment after losing as a 2 seed. They cannot afford to do so again as a 3 seed here this season. So legacies and potentially future teams on the line here. Like you said, not trying to stir anything up, but it's just always interesting to see how these things go because, like you said, all these guys are competitive. They play this game to win. Getting bounced in the first round 2 seasons in a row wouldn't be acceptable to either of these two sides.
And that brings us to our final finally first round matchup here. So used to saying the regular season, it's playoff time. We got to get into that mode here. And once the action gets going, I'm sure we will. That final opening round matchup, you'll get a look at the numbers here from the regular season, though. For the 4th seed in Urabro hockey, as they take on the 5 seed in Goons. And simply put, both teams are looking to prove that they're legit here. Urabro after their best season at the elite level, and Goons, once again, as I mentioned, looking to live up to that previous hype level that they had of being a squad with championship potential. I called that prior matchup the most important, but this one certainly gets a shout for perhaps the most interesting, and it is, of course, the battle between the 2 closest seeds. So often, I think that this particular matchup earns that label.
Yeah, and I have to be honest with you, I would almost be surprised if this thing didn't go to 7. You look at Goons, who are kind of actually in a similar situation to a team like Sawo or Havu. They've made it into the playoffs the last few seasons, but just have not been able to break through to get that deep playoff run despite some of the hype and some of the regular season success that we have had them have. They've kept both of those series close. They lost to Fediestad in ECL 12 in a 6-game series. They lost to H-Reds in a sweep last season, but arguably played H-Reds closer than any team that they faced in the playoffs. 3 of those games were decided in overtime, and all of them by just 1 goal. So this is a Goons team that have a lot to prove. They've had this nucleus of players for a long time, and you kind of wonder after a while if they get bounced out in the first round for a 3rd season, are changes within that lineup inevitable? While with Urabro surprising the league, a Cinderella story, wanting to continue that this season, for my money, they have been the most improved team out of any team in the ECL, not just elite, but from all of the divisions on down. We talked about cutting their goals allowed in a third. Their penalty kill was spectacular this season, going up to 81.4% after being the worst team in penalty kill last season at under 70%. So this is a team that has improved exponentially on their own end, and with a Goons team that's been one of the consistent teams offensively, being around the top 5 every season they've been in elite, It's going to be a lot of fun to watch one of the most improved defensive teams go up against one of the more consistent offensive teams here in the ECL Elite Division.
So with that, everybody, your full preview of the playoffs, of course, your full recap as well of the regular season. A reminder of what is coming up starting on this very broadcast. One more look here at the bracket, as again, the opening round begins right here today. Again, Elite Division action brought to you, as it's been all season long, by our friends at Wilhelm, Koval Lockertzy, and ST Hockey. And a reminder as well of what these teams are playing for, because I alluded towards it earlier with H-Reds and them winning our winter season in that 6K Euro prize. The winner of the spring season also gets that 6K Euro prize package there. But the question is, if it's H-Reds, well, hey, nothing happens. But will it be H-Reds? If it is, they win the grand final prize without having to play a game. But if it is not, we will have a grand final series played between H-Reds and the winner of our spring season for that 10K Euro prize pool. Of course, all of this leading up to just a few short weeks from now. Can you believe it? June 17th and 18th, the spring season final. Again, stuttering over that because B-Majors, we got to announce Sin and I will be there live for that particular matchup. And, well, the nerves are already setting in. And, of course, the grand final will be played on the 19th if necessary. So this is going to be a mad dash through the next 3 weeks or so to find out how we're capping things off here in the ECL Elite Division for the NHL 22 calendar year.
Yeah, and something too to kind of add on before we wrap things up is keep in mind, no one other than H-Reds want to see no grand final. And I think that especially goes for the 7 other teams, right? These guys are competitors. They have that mentality to where they want to be the best. They want to be hoisting that trophy over their heads at the end of the day. And seeing H-Reds not just win 1, but 2 in a row and take the grand final without even playing it, there's a little bit of pride on the line for these two teams. H-Reds have sort of asserted their dominance and their stranglehold of this ECL Elite Division. This is kind of a chance here for one of these teams to maybe take that back a little bit and make things competitive. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see who steps up to the plate and challenges this H-Reds championship team, because you know the old saying, Tugi, if you swing at the king, you best not miss. It's going to be a lot of fun to see who takes that swing and maybe connects here as we go through the playoffs.
Brandon, thank you so much for joining me here for this one. And again, I will say for Sin and I on the 19th, hey, if there isn't a grand final, we're in Finland. We get to explore. So I'm going to have a great day on the 19th, no matter what. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But again, a big thank you to all of you here for joining us here with this recap and preview show. But that does mean, though, as we wrap this up, that it is time to get to the playoff action ahead. Very much looking forward to seeing how this works out. Again, a big thank you to Koval Lockertzy, ST Hockey, and Wilhelm. A reminder for Wilhelm as well, the e-hockey tour on the 19th. Of course, they've had stops every single weekend all throughout the past month and a half or so. It's been an interesting run for them. Sportsgamer.gg for all the information that you need there. And in general, sportsgamer.gg to follow along with not only the Elite Division playoffs, but our pro and below as well. So much going on here at SportsGamer. But for now, let's get to some playoff hockey as we'll throw it over to myself in the future and Mr. Sin for the win, as it's time to get the action underway.